Coming up, PPEs at KHMH, sweetheart contracts. And if the government Gazette is so important, why is it so difficult to get?
You're listening to Brent's 2 Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of February the 8th. Well, the official numbers in the battle against COVID-19 continue to look optimistic. We've had a couple of days this past week with no new deaths, and there was only one day for the week when the positivity rate exceeded 5%. Of course, 5% for two 14-day cycles is considered the threshold for whether or not the virus is under control. So we are not there quite yet, but it certainly seems as if the Ministry of Health and Wellness is determined to hit that target. In fact, Minister Michelle Shabat took what I can only describe as a victory lap during Friday's meeting of the House of Representatives. Now, a bit of optimism is always good for the soul, but I caution anyone, including the minister, from believing that we've actually turned a corner on this pandemic. It defies logic that we had such a high rate of infection in December, during a period when people were packing the stores and socializing with family and friends, and yet somehow the number of COVID-19 cases continues to trend downwards drastically. At this point, I'm surprised the government of New Zealand hasn't sent people to study how Belize managed to pull off such a miracle in only 6 weeks, with really little more than just an extra 2 hours of curfew and stopping the sale of alcohol at 6 p.m. for a while. Now, as I said 2 weeks ago, I still don't believe that everyone who should be getting tested is being tested. Now, those who did get tested en masse last week were employees returning to work at the Corozal Free Zone. And that would definitely give the negative numbers a nice little bump, as hundreds of healthy people had to get tested before reporting back to work. Now, the main reason why I think people who are symptomatic or who've had close contact with someone who is positive might be afraid to get tested is, of course, economic. Few people can afford to lose their income while they quarantine for up to 2 weeks. And that fear got ratcheted up another notch last week when news came out that the Carl Hughesner Memorial Hospital was charging patients hospitalized with COVID-19 $200 per day for the PPEs worn by healthcare workers. The CEO of the KHMH Authority, Michelle Hoare, defended this surcharge by explaining that the hospital works on 2 12-hour shifts per day and that the protocol is for each person working in the COVID ward to change their PPEs 3 times per shift for a total of 12 complete sets of PPEs required every 24 hours. And when you add up the cost of all the items, especially the more expensive pieces such as disposable goggles and disposable coveralls, $100 per healthcare worker per 12-hour shift is probably about right. But what is the staff to patient ratio in the COVID isolation ward? Because every patient in that unit is being charged the same $200 per day. Last week, there were between 10 to 12 patients who were hospitalized for COVID-19 every day. So if you add that up, you get 76 patient days, which means KHMH billed out $15,200 for PPEs in just 1 week. That's enough to fully equip 2 shifts of 11 healthcare workers per shift for the entire week. But my main problem with all of this is I think it's just immoral to be slapping additional fees on people who are in dire medical straits during a pandemic. Now, I believe in socialized medicine, or what is also known as universal health care. Everyone contributes to a government medical insurance scheme, either through taxation or direct payment. And when you need care, you receive it for little or no additional cost. Belize actually started a pilot project for national health insurance way back in 2003. And the Minister of Health and Wellness mentioned in Friday's House meeting that the government might be ready to roll out NHI nationwide. Well, I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that one. But I do think that even a cash-strapped country like Belize could provide basic universal health care if it wanted to make it a priority. But to do that means money that is being wasted elsewhere would need to be channeled into areas of the budget that would actually benefit ordinary Belizeans. One area where GOB could look to find millions of dollars is in all the bloated or unnecessary contracts that are handed out to their favored few. One of those contracts that's in the news right now is for the former director of the National Sports Council, Ian Jones. Jones is a supporter of former sports minister and UDP leader Patrick Faber. In 2017, he was appointed director of the National Sports Council, and in July, his contract was renewed for another 2 years. 4 months later, the UDP lost the general election, and Jones's contract was terminated by the new Minister of Sports, Kevin Bernard. Now, my issue is not whether or not Jones was qualified or whether he did or didn't do a good job running the National Sports Council. My issue is that Ian Jones received a 2-year contract only a few months before a general election. And more than that, he was offered a very lucrative contract in the middle of the pandemic, when no organized sports are being played. Jones is suing for $186,000 for salary and bonuses that would have been paid during the remaining 20 months of his 2-year contract. So that means his total compensation as director of NSC averaged over $9,000 per month. And remember, he got that deal when all sports, even games of pickup basketball, were prohibited. Can you imagine any company in the private sector hiring a new top executive and paying them handsomely while the business was closed and there was no indication of when it might actually be reopening? No, of course not. Now, Jones will very likely win his case, and strictly from my Bush lawyer perspective, he probably should. He was given a legally binding contract from the government of Belize. And no matter what the party in power thinks of these odious arrangements, the court is probably going to order GOB to pay Jones what he is asking. Just check out what happened with Candace Miller, who received a 4-year contract from the former UDP mayor of Belize City, Darrell Bradley, on his way out the door in 2018. Miller was terminated by the new PUP mayor, Bernard Wagner, as soon as he assumed office. But she successfully sued the council and was awarded nearly $400,000. And that's what's really got me pissed off right now. For all the talk the PUP did about sweetheart contracts issued by outgoing administrations in the past, have they done anything to keep that from happening again in the future? The PUP have been in power for almost 3 months, certainly enough time to have passed some sort of legislation prohibiting central or municipal governments from awarding lucrative or long-term contracts to politically appointed persons that will outlive the life of the administration. And yes, the new government has a lot on its plate. But they got elected knowing that municipal elections would only be 111 days away. Yet they couldn't find the will to fix one of the big, expensive problems with patronage politics in Belize. How much do you want to bet that in each of the municipalities that will go to the polls on March 3rd, there are political appointees who have already signed new contracts that will take care of them in the event the election doesn't go the way their party hopes it will? And unless there are changes in which parties run those municipalities after the election, we'll likely never know how many more Candace Millers there are in either party. Now, one source where vigilant watchdogs might be able to uncover what government and city council are up to is the Belize Government Gazette. You've probably heard about the Gazette. It's this special government publication that makes everything official. You see, even after the Governor General signs a piece of legislation or a statutory instrument, it doesn't actually become official until it's recorded in the Gazette. The same goes for government contracts and public holidays, or even something as simple as changes in the opening hours at the post office. It all has to go into the Gazette. It's even used as a verb, as in to be gazetted. The whole notion of the Gazette sounds a bit anachronistic, but it's also a very useful way to record democracy, kind of like the way minutes are taken at a board meeting for an organization. So, even though you've probably heard of the Gazette, I'd wager many Belizeans have never actually seen a copy of this precious document. And that's because the Gazette is not that easy to get. Despite being so important to transparency, there's only one place you can get a copy of the Gazette. That's at Print Belize in Belmopan for a cost of $3. If you want the convenience of having the Gazette mailed to your home or office, a subscription will set you back a whopping $350 per year for a publication that comes out once per week. That's right, nearly $200 in additional costs for someone to put a 25-cent stamp on the Gazette and put it in the mail. Now, just for comparison, you can get 52 weeks of the Amandala newspaper delivered to your door for only $80. Now, you may be asking, why can't we simply get the Gazette online? Well, good question. A question that I actually asked someone at Print Belize. And she told me that the Gazette used to be available online, but they were concerned that people might pirate the Gazette. Now, as astonishing as that seems, Print Belize says they were worried that enterprising bootleggers might download and print their own copy of the Gazette and sell them on the black market for less than $3. Psst, hey buddy, what do you need? Look here, I got the new Bond movie on DVD. No? Okay, how about some cigarettes? I'll give you a great price on these Marlboros. I just got them from the Free Zone. Oh, you don't smoke? Okay, no problem. Hey, have you read the latest episode of the Gazette? I have a copy right here for only $2. That's much cheaper than what they charge at Print Belize. Now, there was a time when you could get the Gazette online for free. That was way back in 2000, which is pretty remarkable because Belize was not exactly an early adopter when it came to internet computer technology and e-governance. But at least for a few years, the illustrious Gazette was available for free to anyone with a computer and a modem. Now, come to think of it, it probably cost more than $3 to read it online in those days, considering how slow and expensive dial-up internet was. But it was forward thinking, and it was the right thing to do. In a free society, access to such important checks and balances of our democracy should always be unfettered. Charging people to read the Gazette is like making meetings of the National Assembly only available on pay-per-view. So, what happened? Well, never mind these concerns about piracy. The real reason is that the government printery, who used to print the Gazette, was privatized in 2003. The assets of the government printery, including machinery, land, and buildings, were given to the Development Finance Corporation, who in turn sold those assets to the man who had been in charge of the government printery, Lawrence Nicholas, for $2.4 million. Now, I won't go into further detail about the birth of Print Belize, but let's just say it was a bit messy. The opposition alleged that persons in or extremely close to the Musa administration were actually silent partners in this new printing company. However, those allegations were never substantiated. 6 existing printers at the time formed an association and sued GOB, demanding to know what assets had been sold, for how much, and to make the details of a contract between government and Print Belize public. What we later found out was that an independent evaluation had determined that the assets of the government printery were worth $3.8 million. And not only did DFC sell off those assets for $1.4 million below value, the government sweetened the deal with a 5-year contract to provide printing services for GOB worth $2.5 million per year, with a 10% markup for Print Belize included. One of the printing services was, and still is, of course, the Gazette. The Gazette, supposedly so important to governance, yet so inconvenient and prohibitively expensive to actually get your hands on it. So, why has all this Gazette business gotten under my skin this week? Because I started thinking, who is going to pay $350 per year to subscribe to the Gazette? And then I realized who. It's all those government offices and statutory bodies and ministries and town councils and all manner of organizations who are funded by you and I, the taxpayers of Belize. An annual recurrent cost of $350 is really a drop in the bucket when you consider the budgets of those entities. It's something that's been a line item for so long they probably don't even see it when they prepare their budgets for the next fiscal year. Or it's viewed as a necessary expense like office supplies. After all, the Gazette is everything, and no self-respecting public sector office should be out of the loop over $350 a year, right? Plus, it's a pretty safe audience for the Gazette, because if anyone in those offices actually bothers to read it, they are less likely to speak up when something doesn't pass the sniff test after being gazetted. But imagine what might happen if yahoos like me started scouring the Gazette every week. Now, I have no idea how many subscriptions Print Belize has sold for the Gazette, and I doubt they would tell me if I asked. But I would be surprised if it's not in the hundreds. And at $3.50 a pop, for something they already got paid to print, and all they have to do is stick a 25-cent stamp on it? Well, that's pretty nice work if you can get it. Meanwhile, people are fighting for their lives in the COVID ward at our public hospital and being charged $200 a day for masks and rubber gloves. Pay cuts for workers are looming. And gasoline just went up for the 6th time since the general election. The government says they don't know where they're going to find any more money during these difficult times. Well, how about start by making the Gazette available online for free? Because not only will you save money on all those subscriptions being paid for with our tax dollars, but maybe you won't be so quick to sign a sweetheart contract if more people are going to actually be able to read about it.
We want to hear from you. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on Twitter and Facebook at 2 Cents Belize, or email us at podcast@oshaproductions.com. That's OXAProductions.com.
Hey, I just want to take a moment to let you know how much I appreciate you listening to this podcast. Now, if you're a first-time listener, welcome. I hope you will keep listening every week. And if you're a regular listener, thank you very much for all your support over the past 24 episodes. I can't tell you how much it means when people message me to let me know they enjoyed Brent's 2 Cents. And for some reason, last week, I seemed to get a lot more personal messages and positive comments than usual. I even got a call from a regular listener in England. Someone I've known professionally for years, but not somebody I usually just shoot the breeze with. So that call was very much appreciated. But here's the thing. The number of people listening the last few weeks has dipped. I don't think that's unique to my show because I belong to a number of podcast Facebook groups and several other podcasters have mentioned declining downloads since the holidays. So maybe it's cyclical. But I am a bit concerned that the audience for Brent's 2 Cents is not growing as fast as it should. And so I'm asking for your help. Now, I'm not making this podcast to become internet famous, and I don't sell advertising, so the number of people listening doesn't put even $1 in my pocket. But I do spend a considerable amount of time on these episodes, and I would like as many people as possible to hear them. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends about it. You see, I can make all the promo clips in the world and post on every social media platform out there, but there's nothing as powerful as a recommendation from you. I bet you might even be surprised to find out many of your friends don't even know about podcasting yet. So you might be the one to introduce them to an entire world of great podcasts, including some excellent shows created by Belizeans for Belizeans. Okay, before I go, I want to give a shout out to a couple of my fellow Belizean podcasters who also released new episodes in the past week. The Natasha Stewart podcast dropped a brand new episode with special guest, politician and entrepreneur Alan Pollard. And my boys Steve and Jeremy are back after a bit of a break with not one, but two brand new episodes of 2 Teaspoons of Belize. Remember, you can be part of the podcast movement in Belize by sharing Brent's 2 cents with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. And don't forget to subscribe to all the great Belizean podcasts on your favorite app so you never miss an episode from any of us. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at 2 Cents Belize. And don't forget that you can always leave a voice message for the podcast about anything you want to talk about. You'll find that link in the description for this episode. If you want to support this podcast financially, you'll find a link to buy me a coffee in the description for this show. A coffee costs as little as $3 US or 6 Belize, but your donations really help to offset the costs associated with making a podcast. And that's going to do it for episode 24 of Brent's 2 Cents. I'll be back next week with my 2 cents on whatever's on my mind. But until then, please continue to wear your masks, wash your hands, stay home as much as possible. And most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.